Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Jenin Eunice, here with my co-host Melissa Whitty, and we're very excited to have with us today Trish Wood. She's a journalist and writer and documentary filmmaker. I met her a few years ago. We both were sort of former leftists, or I don't know exactly. I'll let her explain her political journey, who dissented on COVID lockdowns and mandates. And Trish lives in Canada, which was even more insane than the United States, as many people may recall, with the mandates. And so she was really had to live through a very tough time. And we were also a couple of the few people who agreed on the issue of Israel-Palestine after October 7th. And she had some very nuanced views due to her time in the region and really, I think, deep understanding of the history and the conflict. So we'll get into all of that. Welcome, Trish. And first, Melissa, over to you.
Hi there, guys. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Coming again, guys. We've had so much positive feedback the last couple episodes, so we hope to keep going, and we know that it will. If you could, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We're almost at 300 followers on YouTube, which is exciting for us. And so we truly appreciate, especially all of your shares, definitely. And welcome, Trish. Thank you so much.
Hi, Mel. Okay, great. So as we were saying just before we started rolling, I think, Jenin, you and I have a pretty similar background. I was left of center. I was texting Bernie Sanders' wife talking points during the campaign in 2016. That's how far left I was. But and part of that was watching the media kind of weaponize lies against Trump. I'm a weirdo that way, and I did see him as a bit of the underdog then. And he was also pretty anti-war in those days, or so he said. He certainly doesn't seem that way now, but he did then. And as being an ex-legacy media journo, I was really kind of put off by the whole thing and had to start over and rethinking who's really talking about free speech and meaning it and all that sort of thing. And then COVID happened, and because I had covered Tony Fauci during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and had limited respect for him then, I was very, very, if I can say radicalized about that, I will. I mean, I chucked my whole career as a film director. I just finished a big series for Amazon Studios in LA, which is very left-wing. Of course, they all are down there. To start a podcast and start speaking openly about the threat that I felt was coming from the way that Fauci and NIH and everybody was talking about COVID-19. So that's kind of how I ended up on Twitter, and I kind of met you and then became pretty good friends with Jay and had a good run. I felt really, and I'm sure you did too, Jenin, I felt like I was doing a public service. I didn't try to monetize particularly. I just every day got into the studio, or every week got into the studio and did a podcast with some new revelation about COVID-19. And the basis for what I was doing really was kind of the human side of the equation. They kept making all of these edicts that were hurting people with not much basis in science, mostly no basis in science to back them up. And they weren't doing what we would call a kind of a risk-benefit ratio to support it. So I thought, wow, we live in a weird world. The public health people are doing lockdowns and people are committing suicide. They're closing schools and kids are being ruined by that. They're not allowing unvaccinated people to get transplants in this country. Like, that felt really, dare I say, evil to me and kind of rearranged my DNA. And I think both of you would probably agree with this. I can't go back. I'm a changed person. Part of it is I feel like I have a little bit of PTSD as a result of what happened and what we all witnessed, and which no one has ever acknowledged or apologized for. That's hard. But I also just think that everything now has changed. We can't believe in or trust any institutions. They lie about a lot of things. And I also feel very strongly that a lot of us are cognitively impaired because we drink from a fire hose of propaganda on a daily basis. It's so hard to figure out what's true and what's not. And we're so manipulated by people, right?
I think you and I, in fact, I'm pretty sure we were talking or chatting or something. I can't remember exactly now, but we sort of, I mean, when October 7th happened, I was fairly confident. I never talked about the Israel-Palestine conflict with most of the people I became friends with from the COVID dissident crowd, but I'd sort of assumed that most of them were attuned to propaganda and how it's used. And so I thought they would see through this and the calls to just basically kill everyone in Gaza. And I was really shocked that that group was very, I would say, disproportionately, extremely Zionist and extreme on this subject. And they've kept it up for like 18 months. The same people, no empathy for Palestinians. They don't care at all if Palestinian children are killed, or they blame it on Hamas, which kind of defies basic cause and effect, you know, like you can't, just because someone did something bad to you a year and a half ago doesn't mean that you can kill everybody and everything for the end of time, which seems to be the justification. And also not understanding the dynamics and why, you know, obviously I don't defend Hamas, I have to say that every time, but why Palestinian resistance groups rose up and resort to violence, total lack of understanding or interest in understanding. Do you agree, is your perception that there was a disproportionate number of kind of extreme Zionists in that crowd, and why do you think that is?
Well, I think that there's a continuum of people who believe that. Right at the end are the more extreme people who we can name and talk about in a minute. And then there's a whole continuum of that, of people who either said nothing or hinted at it, but didn't really say it. And I want to get to the part where I sort of understand that a bit. Like a year ago, I was more mad at them than I am now. I've chilled out a little bit about it for reasons which we can talk about. But I have to tell you, it was like a bit of a gut punch for me to see people who I'd looked up to and admired, like Jordan Peterson, who blocked me the minute I challenged him on his quick and ill thought out urge for Netanyahu to, what was it, go get him or something like that, as if the people under the bombs weren't human. That was really shocking. Gad Saad was another guy who instantly, if you criticized anything Israel was doing, not Jewish people, but Netanyahu's Kahanist, far-right militaristic government, which is just not even up for debate, if you criticize that, you were a Jew hater, which was a phrase I had never even heard before. And I thought, what is going on with these free speech guys? What is going on with these guys who said that COVID was inhumane? Wait a second, right? It was a total game changer for me. And I've thought deeply about it. And I've tried to check my own BS and be kind. And I think it's really about conservatism at the end of the day. I'm not really a conservative because supporting Israel within the conservative framework is a blind doctrine. You're not allowed to, nor should you ever question it, right? And I kind of didn't know that. So I'll just explain what happened to me. I've got it right here. On October 13th, I wrote my first piece after October 7th. And I was absolutely struggling with that image of that poor young girl in the back of the pickup truck with the twisted around leg and the men spitting on her. Like, I was just horrified. And I talked about that, and I was heavily critical of Hamas for doing it. But I also said, I've covered a lot of war stories in my day, including writing a book about the Iraq War. And when they start with the BS about the atrocities, something really bad is coming, right? So I debunked early with a lot of other people, including Blumenthal and other interesting people, the beheaded baby story. And I thought, why are they even doing this? It's so obvious. There was one baby, one infant killed on that day. We know her name. We know who she was. And yet all of the kind of pro-Israel people are, Ben Shapiro and the rest, are pushing the beheaded babies. Ben Shapiro was reduced to showing a photograph on his Twitter feed of a charred, I'm assuming it was human remains, infant that isn't even a real picture of anything that happened that day, right? So I've got enough world experience and reporting experience to say, what the fuck is going on? This is nuts. And what I wrote was, when they start upping the nonsense, it means it's going to be really bad. It means that their moral imperative for what they're about to do, which is not saying Israel can't defend itself. Of course it can and should. but it's going to be something over the top. That's what that portrayed. Gulf of Tonkin was Israel. The incubator story was the first Gulf War, also a lie. And so I wrote that, and I thought it was measured and smart. I'm proud of it. Yeah. The pushback on it from my readers was absolutely unexpected. And I think my coverage, which was pretty fair, I did get less tolerant of the bombing of the civilians very quickly as time went by. But initially, I was probably a bit more even-handed than I am now. But I was not expecting the blowback, and I probably lost maybe 5,000 followers on my Substack. And I've got a good number, but it was shocking. And there was also quite a lot of vitriol. And this is what I thought about it, and I bet you guys have too. You loved me when I was debunking COVID propaganda, right? You know I know how to do it. I'm a journalist. Yeah. But when I'm debunking propaganda that you have believed in and lived with your whole life, you aren't able to see that I'm doing the same thing. And I understand there is emotional things going on within, the diaspora Jewish community and also in Israel. I understand that, and I get it. But there's sort of a point where you have to not view the information you're consuming selectively just because it feeds what you already think. And that's that's where the truth over tribe thing that I'm always railing about came from, because I feel that pushback was driven by conservatives, which I do swim around in a bit, and also just people who were hardcore Zionists and wouldn't brook any criticism at all. And it was a big wake-up call for me. And as I said, I was sick to my stomach that people I loved, and it's not just the Gad Sad or the JP people, but people who were big, important people to me in COVID times said nothing.
Yeah, I having been a Republican my whole life and having I knew exactly how they were going to respond to
Did you? Wow.
Oh yeah. I saw it. I mean, because I know that Israel is like the third rail, like you can't touch it. If you do, interestingly enough, Ron DeSantis had given a speech at it was that Moms for Liberty, I think it is, the group. He had given a speech with them in Philadelphia, and there was a really heavy pro-Israel tone to that speech, and it was like in September. And I actually had tweeted about it, and I said, this is really weird. I don't understand why he's talking like this, kind of over and over, saying, how much we're going to stand with Israel, how much we're going to be with them, because this was again prior to October 7th, right? So it was just weird to me, and I couldn't believe even then how much the pushback was. People just questioning, well, why would you care that he said that? And I'm like, well, because he's running to be the president of the United States, not Israel, obviously. But so after October 7th. And I had a very small following then. I had right at 6,000 followers, and it dropped off almost 700, like almost immediately within days, because on October 7th I was critical. I said, this is wrong. We shouldn't. Obviously, this isn't going to right any of the wrongs that have been done to the Palestinians. And then it took like 2 days, and I was like, all right, This is already out of hand. We've already dropped 3,000 bombs. Okay, I think it's done. But of course it wasn't done, and we all knew it wasn't done. And it's 18 months later, and it's still not done.
Well, I think for me, Mel, also, I've been waiting, and I'm still waiting for people like Douglas Murray, who I used to admire. I think what's happened, I just want to say this before I forget. I'm trying to figure out why all these culture war guys are all in saying stupid stuff about geopolitics, including Ukraine, right? Douglas Murray is also all in for Ukraine. Who is no one's all in for Ukraine. Maybe Lindsey Graham, and I think maybe he's changing his mind. Why are they failing on this? And I think it's a couple of things. Someone the other day used the word podcastistan, and this is its own ecosystem now, right? Culture war stuff is easy. You can make credible arguments against calling trans women by their pronouns, which I think was Jordan Peterson's way in. You can call out extreme anti-racism training that merely makes people hate each other. That's easy. Yeah. This is harder, right? Like, well, the emotional response you might have to seeing the footage, that part is easy, but understanding what's going on is harder. It takes, I don't excuse people saying, I don't get it, so I'm not going to write about it. Like, no, you can figure it out, like I did. But I think that this is showing limitations in the podcast bro, highly paid all-stars about what topics they should and shouldn't be discussing. And I'll speak about myself. I don't speak economics on my show, ever. I don't get it. I can't balance my own checkbook, and I don't.
I'm the same, by the way.
Right? Like if somebody called and said, Trish, like if Joe Rogan said, Trish, come on and talk about economics, I would decline because I can't do it. But these guys, and I don't mean individually because I don't know them, but I'm hypothesizing that they got big really fast. People treated them as kind of icons and public intellectuals and the other stuff. So when Gaza, Israel happened, a lot of them didn't have any experience except Douglas Murray, who has experience, but it's bad experience. He's a neocon who supported the Iraq war. He's the last guy you want talking about Israel, Gaza, or any war, because they were just wrong. But the other folks don't have any experience really in talking about this, and yet they shed on other people for not being experienced, but they don't have it, and they're wrong about it. And I think what we're seeing now with the kind of, JP was just on Joe Rogan saying there are certain right-wing influencers who are psychopaths. And I might argue that somebody who cheers bombing women and children might also require that diagnosis. I'm not meaning him, but seriously, it feels like there's pushback now because they're starting to lose the argument all this time later. What has been gained? What has Israel gained? They've gained nothing unless their intention the whole time was to go in and take Gaza and kick everybody out and grab it. And it looks like that's what it was. And that has a name, and it's a name that they have been saying it's not this, right? So I kind of said two things there and combined them. I didn't mean to, but we have a problem in podcast land with some of these big guys not knowing what they don't know. And we also have a problem with the idea that they have to kind of talk about everything. Like the first after October, Trigonometry had podcast bros on, right? They didn't call Rashid Khalidi. They didn't, like we used to in the olden days, we had Edward Said on every time something happened in Lebanon. We would call people who knew what they were talking, or who was the woman, Hanan Ashrawi from, the female PLO spokesman. And then we'd have the Israeli side, right? We had like actual people who knew what they were talking about. Right. And what do the podcasts do now? And the other person who does this is the big investment guy. What's it, PBD, that podcast? I've forgotten. Whatever.
Patrick.
David. Yeah. It's a bunch of guys sitting around yakking. And that's fine if you're talking stocks or what was on Netflix last night. But this is big stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there has to be a point where, and I'm not like agreeing with Douglas Murray on expertise only, right? I'm saying that these guys could seek out these people to know more. But if you've done that, then you also have the expertise to understand that Dave Smith's not doing a bad job. He's actually doing, and why is he doing a good job? Because he did the research, right?
Yeah.
He's not just waltzing in at the last minute and,
People have told me that I underestimate the degree to which a lot of these people are probably paid by Israel. They're basically paid influencers, or at least by AIPAC or something. So, Israeli interest groups. Because I think I'm also kind of intellectually honest. Like I can't help saying what I really think. So it's hard for me to even imagine that people can get paid to say things they don't really think. But that's what I keep getting is no, they're getting paid. That's what you don't understand. Do you think there's something to that?
I don't know if anybody's getting paid directly. I mean, that would be a pretty big scandal, at least in my opinion, if they were. But let's face it, Jenin and Mel, the people who are speaking with some conviction about the other side are not monetizing it, right? Like, I think the only guy who's monetizing in a good way is Napolitano. He's figured out a way to do it. He's doing great, right? But most people who are arguing the other side or arguing for more balance, whatever, have paid a financial price for it. So I don't necessarily feel that they're being paid directly, but certainly there is career protection going on, I think. And JP was working for Ben Shapiro. So, and look what happened to Candace Owen. I mean, she's bye-bye, right? So I don't want to be that cynical either, because here's what that says, if you really think about it. That says that they are prepared to let this rolling human tragedy continue because they're getting money for it. And I like to think that people aren't that way, but I've had unclean thoughts about people I used to admire who are either towing the party line or staying quiet about it.
Yeah, for me, I struggle with these people. Like, you are much more generous than I am. At a certain point, I think if you comment on politics in general, if that's what you do, that's your thing online, then you actually do have a duty to humanity in general to speak out against this, because it's crossed. It's one thing to not speak in October, November, December 2023, but
course.
you know, 18 months later, and you know, another round of bombing that just happened this morning, 16 people dead this morning yet again. And these people now, I see a lot of them have just gone quiet. They don't say anything at all, and
or they're inching their way back in, or they're sneaking back in, right?
Right. They've refollowed, you know, some of the bigger accounts that unfollowed me, refollowed. And I appreciate them. And I'm not saying, like, I get it. It's scary and the pushback is intense. I do understand. But at the same time, I just don't know how people expect to walk away from this with any credibility, right? Because if you can't speak out and easily identify this clear case of good and evil, right? Or I shouldn't say good necessarily, but just straight up evil, right? Then I think you've just lost your ability to claim the moral high ground or moral authority on anything.
Yeah, well, that's the world that we live in right now, isn't it? I mean, even like myself, I've said to some people who were quite cross with me I had a doctor on just back from Gaza with photos and everything. And this is all normal journalism from my career over 40 years at the highest levels of it in this country. It's just normal. But I think that early on, here's what I would take back. And I saw your interview with Naomi last week, and it actually made me, who I know, I did a live show with her. I like her very much, and she's very generous and kind to me. But I struggled watching her struggle, and I did some thinking about it, and I feel that there is within the diaspora, like, I think Israel is kind of bonkers right now because of, I think Netanyahu needed a mass hysteria event. Not that you wouldn't be hysterical after October 7th, of course you would be, but he made it worse. The atrocities were worse. He kept it going. He's not, I think, been good for the mental health of Israelis, actually, because I don't think this is going to end well for them. But just getting back to Naomi for a minute, and others who were cross with me, you know, I think if you're brought up to fear things and to feel that people are out to get you, and that is part of some upbringing, not all, but some kids, Jewish kids at the schools and the summer camps that they go to. And they're trying also, you know, to honor Holocaust relatives. It's a very confusing thing. So I kind of feel like I was too smart too soon in a way now they're coming back and saying, thank you for what you said. Maybe I should have been more sensitive than just kind of vomiting out all the stuff I thought was wrong with what was happening. And I think we do have an obligation there. But at the same time, that doesn't let off the hook this time later for really smart people who've said nothing to keep saying nothing, and let people like Jenin and others who've been brave, you know, Max and Aaron and some other really good people, carry this weight. And I just want to say one more thing so people fully understand. What drove my early writing and podcasting on this, it was so critical, was that I know that when the Holocaust happened, people weren't writing and talking about it. They didn't take the refugee boats. The New York Times was terrible about it. And so as someone who's had a long investigative career, I always said, what would I do? What would I do?
Yeah.
And when this started looking like it was really asymmetrical and it was going to end very, very badly for the Palestinians, part of my DNA said, you got to be here. And maybe if I'm wrong, and history proves me wrong, and that this was the smartest thing that anybody could ever do to end conflict, well, fine. I don't believe that. But I did the best I could with the tools I have, and the tools I have, at the risk of sounding arrogant, are not insubstantial. I was in Rwanda after the genocide. I covered the Intifada in Israel. I've been places. I've seen things, and my instinct was I learned from the brave Holocaust survivors. People aren't going to like this, but I did that. You have to talk about it when it's happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that was, that's was very much my thinking. My career has taken a huge hit, as Mel knows. As someone who was sort of rising, I guess, First Amendment lawyer on the right, I'm not invited to anything anymore. I know, people have told me there were significant efforts made to ensure I don't get speaking things. So I don't, my career is, I'm going to move it in another direction, but we'll see. But it was
Are
massive,
you going to move it in another?
Yeah.
Are you going to?
Well, we'll talk offline about it. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what to do. But
I want to know about that. I also think that people who know you, and I'm not going to name them, but people who know you who are now in high positions should be championing you. Because America is supposed to be the big old fat free speech beacon, isn't it? And Jenin Yunus, who has a Palestinian father who I love, from the interview we did, what a dignified and gracious man,
thank you,
should be allowed to think what you think and say what you want to say. Isn't that what all the conservatives were yammering about?
Yeah, but they're all such hypocrites. So, but I did what I had to do. And I'll admit, having Palestinian background, I probably have very, very, very strong emotional reaction, maybe more than if I didn't have that, to watching, children being killed and also just knowing No, I know.
You can actually not know anyone, and
I know.
Still have a really strong
I very much admire the people too who don't have like a personal tie to it and who've risked a lot. But in any event, it's. And I did want to say, when you said maybe you could have been more even-handed at the beginning, I think you were so brave and you inspired me. Like, I'm not sure if it weren't for you and a couple other people, I think I might have kept my mouth shut. Like, I needed to feel like there was some other people talking about this and taking the
when your mortgage defaults, you might not feel that way.
Yeah, which is
But I do look at, here's what we all learned, all of us, didn't we? From COVID and now this, I don't regret not getting the vaccine. I don't regret throwing my career in the dumpster to talk about COVID and the bad science. It cost me a lot. Look at my last film I made, I won't say the amount, but it was it was Hollywood money, right? I'll never make that again. Never, because of this. And I'm not complaining. You just keep going. Don't you just keep doing what you're doing, don't you? And maybe what goes around comes around. One day you'll be financially better for it. You're certainly trustworthy, but just getting back to Podcastistan for a minute and the bros. There were a lot of bros. I think one of the things that bugged me, and I had to restrain myself when I was writing about it, was the Rescue the Republic deal. None of those people I really love as much as I did before. They said they were anti-war, and they wouldn't really talk about why wouldn't you talk about it? Why wouldn't they have done that? I was very...
Yeah, because it's not even a war, right? It's a slaughter at this point.
Yeah.
It's been a slaughter.
Well, that's the funny thing Douglas Murray said. He said, Hamas is not following the rules of war. And I'm like, they don't have an air force, do they? They don't have an army? What are you talking about? It's madness. Yeah.
Yeah, and every counterexample they dismiss, that's just Pallywood, or that didn't happen, or there's, the evidence, for instance, of there were 65, I think, medical workers in Gaza, not necessarily from there. Lots of them were Western, who said there were a pattern of children getting shot in the head and chest, which suggests they were executed.
I heard them.
And they were just, ignored. They came to visit Congress, D.C. I'm in D.C., and not a single senator showed up. Can you imagine if this was about Israeli children being shot by Hamas or like any Arab nation? There, every single senator would be there, and we'd have calls for, nuclear war and stuff like that. Just the lack of regard for the lives of Palestinians is so stunning to me.
Yeah, I mean, you had Dr. Mark Perlmutter, who again is Jewish, he's been to Gaza, I believe it's 3 or 4 times now, give very powerful testimony. And he's a world-renowned surgeon, and he's sitting here saying, I have personally seen children with sniper bullets in their head. And he can't get a single person in Congress to care. And that is just so shameful, because we paid for those bullets. Yeah. It's not like this is some conflict that we aren't involved in, it's not even that we're not involved in, it's that we are 100% directly facilitating. It would not be happening if not for the support and, undying loyalty of our Congress to this foreign nation.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line with these guys is always, well, what would you do? And somebody said that to me on about day 7 or 8 after October 7th, or longer, probably maybe 3 weeks. And I said, well, we need a peace deal and autonomy for the Palestinians. Like, why can't we just do that? And the idea that has permeated the culture and the podcasts and the news and politics is never a diplomatic solution. It's never a 2-state solution. It's never that. And I would really like someone just to say to me how what they're doing in Gaza is going to make Israel safer. I don't think at the end of the day it can. I think a lot of Arab states have been sitting this one out, but they're not going to be able to do that for very long. And I don't think that you can do this and expect that it's going to make you safer. And let me just add, Netanyahu is prolonging the war because he was going to trial for corruption 5 minutes before October 7th, which was left wide open. Wow, why did that happen? Yeah. He's prolonging it. Like, children are dying, in my view, to keep him out of jail or to keep him in power, which is also awful.
It's definitely our last guest said exactly the same things. So that's,
Who was it? Who said it? Who was it?
Kurt Mills. We haven't posted his episode yet, but I think we will today.
He sounds smart.
But I mean, and anybody, who understands human nature knows that you can't just bomb people into submission. To me, it's like looking at when people say you can't reward them with a state. Well, first of all, that's collective punishment, right? Like, you can't say because, these Hamas guys did that a 15-year-old or a 5-year-old in Palestine doesn't deserve basic human rights in Gaza or the West Bank, which they don't have. And that obviously when people are exposed to these oppressive conditions where they have no rights, and they don't in either Gaza or the West Bank, and we've talked about that on the show many times, that, unfortunately what's going to happen is terrorist groups will rise up and resort to violence. Yeah. And if you want to actually find a solution, you have to address that underlying problem. It's like looking at, the Nat Turner slave rebellion. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but, he led a revolt and killed a lot of white people. It's like if you looked at that incident and said, well, that's the problem. We have to kill more black people, or else they're going to kill us. Like, no, obviously the problem is slavery. That doesn't mean it's okay to kill people, or I'm glad he did. But if you actually want to solve this problem, you have to look at the circumstances.
I fear we've really fallen very far morally right now. And it's not just what's happening on the ground there. It's what's happening in Washington, what's happening here. I'll just give one kind of example that, I'm kind of an optimist at heart. And I mean, I'm not right now, but there are times when things have really broken through. And there's stories I kind of bring back from the field that I want to tell people. So we interviewed the mother of one of Ted Bundy's murder victims. The girl's name was Susan Ranclar. She was at Evergreen College, where Brett actually was later. And disappeared, and I believe they found her body later. And he had done terrible things to them all. And Ted was executed on death row in Florida. And as I was speaking to her for the film we were doing, she started crying. And I thought, oh, she's crying for her daughter, or she's crying because she's happy Ted was executed. And she said, no, I'm crying because they executed Ted Bundy. And I was like, Mrs. Rancourt, what are you talking about? And she said, well, I'm against capital punishment. So I have to be against capital punishment for the man who killed my daughter.
Wow.
And I thought, I started sobbing.
Wow.
Like I couldn't.
Yeah.
I said, "Wow, you are a spiritual giant." You see, we're called to be who Mrs. Rancourt is, and I do think about after 9/11, after October 7th, if our leaders had been more fully formed as spiritual and good human beings who wanted the best for their people, they wouldn't do the retribution thing. Yeah. They wouldn't do that. You got to do a military thing, and you got to get Hamas, and you got to do all that, right? But the whipping up of kind of terrorist fever never works out well. And I think the whole terrorist thing has been a big stain. Look at Nelson Mandela would be a terrorist today, right? Yeah. The IRA would be terrorists today. They're naming schools after Nelson Mandela, for God's sakes. I looked it up. The ANC murdered 74 people with bombs, right?
Yeah.
So, I know October 7th was extremely gruesome. It sounds like it probably was. We don't know exactly how many people were killed and how, but I take it on full authority that it was gruesome and awful. And I did see snippets, and it was terrible. But we can't always try to solve these big human issues by sending in the guns and just keeping on shooting forever and ever. It's not good for us at the end of the day. And I think it's going to hurt America too. I think people are saying, what? Why are you arresting these kids? What about free speech? It's so obvious that your government is bought and paid for by AIPAC. It's not even a secret or even a question anymore.
No.
Well, I don't know if you saw these videos coming out of New York from just a couple days ago that, people say, you say about it's going to have a stain on America. Well, a lot of this conflict is coming to America. And you see it in these videos that emerged out of Brooklyn when Itamar Ben-Gvir was giving his speech at a synagogue on Thursday, I believe it was. And there were some protesters, and they were just out there. They were waving the Palestinian flag. They had some watermelon stuff. It wasn't, and then it broke up. Well, when the speech, I guess, was over, you had like a mob. An actual mob of people coming out of the synagogue and chasing women down in the streets.
The video is shocking.
So it's.
And then Elise Stefanik's take was that it was just a mob of anti-Semitic protesters who just hated Jews outside the synagogue, and that they were responsible for the violence, which is they were protesting Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a convicted terrorist. I read that apparently he was indicted for terrorism so many times they ran out of ink when they were trying to print out this, and he keeps a picture of Baruch Goldstein in his office, who killed 29 Muslims praying peacefully at a mosque. That's what they were protesting. I'm not the biggest fan of protesting speakers, but you have every right to do that. It's a reasonable thing.
Yeah. And it was nothing. And this woman, and the videos are just so shocking because it is literally, I'm not even exaggerating. People haven't seen it. It is a mob of people, at least 50, if not 100 or more men, all men, chasing down a single woman who is being escorted by an officer from the NYPD. They are throwing things at her. They threw a trash can at her. They hit her in the head with one of those orange cones from the street. Wow. They are shouting the most disgusting
And it turned
things.
out she was Jewish Israeli, right?
Well, one of them was Jewish, and then the other one wasn't. Yeah. Well, she's American, but she holds an Israeli passport.
Oh, okay.
It's the girl
but
that they beat
Jewish.
Another girl. She's Jewish. They beat her. She had, they caused a huge wound on her head. She was bleeding all over her face. It's just shocking. And then what's been even more shocking is that there's no condemnation whatsoever from these same people. If you know, and of course we always say, but can you imagine if the roles were reversed? If a group of, you know, pro-Palestine people chased a single Jewish woman down the street yelling, you know, death to Jews, the same way that they were yelling death to Arabs at her, I mean, we would still be hearing about it. There would be congressional hearings. They would probably try to invoke martial law. You know, it would be so dramatic.
Yeah,
and
it was
yet,
very shocking. It was very shocking footage, and I blame the rhetoric in Washington. Look, if I was American, I would have voted for Trump. I've said that. I'm not so sure I would do that today. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. I don't know. But against Kamala, ugh. You know, I mean,
I voted for Jill Stein.
did you?
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah. So but the rhetoric is terrible. Like it's a lot of people voted for Trump because he's anti-war, or he said he was anti-war. I don't like what he's doing to the Houthis. I don't like the rhetoric. I don't like how Pete Hegseth. I don't like any of it. It's not what they talked about. And I've been defending him since 2016 when before 2016 when I wrote the book on the Iraq War, because he'd been vocally against it. And I thought, well, that's sort of cool. Maybe he'll do a blurb or something. So Little Brown, who were my publishers in New York, reached out to him. We didn't hear back, but I remember specifically we went after his endorsement because he was very outspoken about being against the war in Iraq. So this is very weird to me. I don't know what he's doing.
I mean, I don't know that. I think he might be like personally anti-war, but he's just too embedded now with. I mean, he accepted all sorts of money from Miriam Adelson, and so this might not be like what he wanted, and I think
the voters don't want it, Jenin.
Yeah,
they don't want. They want peace. They don't want this.
But right? Israel wants it. And we know who's pulling the strings.
Yeah. I'm kind of tired of us kind of, and it's not you, everybody says that, but you know, actually I'm to the point where it's actually illegal to take money, quid pro quo, and say, you give me this money, I will do this thing for you. So no, I'm actually rejecting that. I don't give a how much freaking money Miriam Adelson gave to you. You have an obligation. Your only duty is uphold the Constitution of the United States to do what is best for America. This is not good for America. And you can tell Miriam Adelson to pound sand the same way that you told those banks to pound sand the 3 times that you filed bankruptcy. So I just don't want to hear this, oh, I got this debt that I have to pay. No, you don't. Okay, she chose to put her money in the mouth because that's who she wanted to win, and that's it.
Yeah,
you know.
I mean, obviously, I think that, but I'm just
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there for everybody who says it. No, I reject that.
No, it's morally abhorrent, and we're seeing that here too in this election we've got tomorrow, where people are very, very cognitively impaired from propaganda. And here's what they're doing, right? Our country, Canada, which is resource rich, but we're not allowed to get at them because of net zero or something. I mean, people are struggling. We're on the GDP list, like number 45 or some, like really, it's insane. People are struggling. My kids, I have 2 grown boys, will never be able to buy a house.
Wow.
Unless I start monetizing pretty quickly. Yeah, they'll never. Like the houses here are $1.8 million. Anything decent, $1.8 million.
Wow.
Right? And everything's expensive and wages aren't growing. Justin Trudeau has destroyed this country, and he did it by turning us against each other with cultural kind of social justice-y issues. They froze the bank account of the Freedom Convoy and beat them up quite badly, some of the truckers. I mean, it's awful. So here's where we are. The country is screwed. Everybody knows it. And they bring in Mark Carney, who is a central banker. He was head of the Bank of Canada. He was head of the Bank of England. He was at Goldman Sachs. He was big friends with the BlackRock guys. Now, he was Trudeau's economic advisor while they were destroying the country. So he's running for prime minister. He's actually prime minister now because our system allowed Justin Trudeau to resign and him to get voted in by the party. No one's ever voted for this guy, and he's already prime minister. So now he's running to actually maintain that job. But our electorate is so propagandized that they're voting for the party that's ruined their lives. And it's not just a new guy of the party, it's the guy who was advising the old guy of the party how to wreck the country and ruin their lives. But they're voting for him, and here's why, guys, because he said he's going to stand up to Trump. That's it. We're screwed. We are totally, totally screwed.
Yeah, so just for people who don't know, can you give us a little rundown? Because it wasn't going to be like this. Just even a couple months ago, you guys, there's a conservative candidate, and he was polling up, you said 25 points?
Yeah, it was Pierre Poilievre, and it is Pierre Poilievre, and he was up by 25 points. It was a slam dunk. It was a three-pointer. It was like easy peasy, right? And then Donald Trump said two things. He said, Canada should be the 51st state, totally trolling. I mean, I didn't believe he actually meant that. And also he started talking about tariffs because he asked Justin Trudeau to stop the flow of fentanyl across our borders, which is a perfectly reasonable ask. And Trump and Trudeau being Trudeau, instead of doing that, provoked it into a tariff war. So then now we have this slogan up here. This is so embarrassing. I mean, Mike Myers is even like, who cares about Mike Myers? He lives in New York. He's been there for 40 years. You know, he's doing these videos in hockey sweaters, every stupid Canadian cliche with his elbows up, which is a phrase hockey enforcers use when they're going to fight or something. I mean, so now you have all these Canadian, mostly wealthy boomers who own $5 million houses, wandering around in hockey sweaters saying, elbows up, we don't want Trump. I mean, it's just, and that's why the Liberals will probably get in tomorrow. That's why. That is why.
That's your prediction? You think they...
I don't want to say it. I hope I'm wrong. It's really hard. Like, as you guys know, the information space is so corrupt right now. There's one group of people saying, the Tories are going to squeak in. And there's another group of people who say there's no way and it's going to be. So I might, just because I'm a negative person, think that it's going to be the Liberals, but I just hope that it's not, I really do.
Real quick. So in Canada, do you vote directly for the prime minister, or you vote for the party and then that's who they're gonna
for the party. For the candidate in my riding, right? Okay. So, and we've had early voting, and they say that the early voting is probably Liberal because it's more educated people. There's a real class war going on in this country too, just FYI. And I'm still pretty left-wingy on that stuff. I really want to champion the working people here. And what the government did that was so awful is that they, kind of like they've done down there, they've convinced the elites and the middle class that the working people in this country are white supremacist losers, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the cultural divide in this country. It's quite profound. And there were actually fisticuffs in some of the lineups for early voting too. I mean, I had a guy on my show 2 weeks ago, and his name is David Betts, and he's from King's College in London, and he is predicting civil war in a lot of Western countries. It's probably hyperbole, but he does make a very solid case. I don't think that we would, because we're very nonviolent in Canada, which is a good thing. But we're really nonviolent. We're passive aggressive. We're not aggressive, right? But I understand why he's saying that, because the divides between people are huge. The divide between rich and poor is huge. There's a lot of immigration here of very, very kind of visible people. And it wasn't done in a way that people are being kind of acclimated. So visually, your field of vision where you live has changed significantly. And a lot of people feel threatened by that. And I understand why they do. I do. They're not managing this very well. And if you speak up about it, you're a bad person. So, it's a very, very destabilized environment. Trudeau was the ultimate globalist, except if there was anybody more globalist, it would be Mark Carney, and that's the guy who's in that role right now. But people just, the legacy media here is they get paid by the government. They get handouts. So they tend to favor the Liberals. And also Pierre Poilievre made, I think it was a strategic error by saying he was going to defund the CBC, which is my old place I used to work, because they're very powerful. So they're all in for the Liberals now because they don't want to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of...
I'd like to ask you guys, if you don't mind me asking you guys a question, just about the podcast stuff and where, after all these years now, you think it's going, right? Because they were kind of invented by men. They were all kind of gamers and streamers and Twitchers who now have, that's where they came from, to the point where Destiny was even invited on a show to talk about geopolitics. I mean, really?
I know.
But so we're at a moment now, right? Because they're failing on some, and on other levels they're doing, I still love Joe Rogan, so they're really doing well on that. But what do you guys think about where we go? Because I'm not sure people are smarter now than they were under legacy media.
Yeah.
I think that people, one thing I think that happened with the podcast is that I want to say it's fractured the attention span of people, right? So everybody's worried about their own little thing, and you can get really, really into it. You haven't, podcasts that are just focused on, I don't know, just the Epstein files. Not that those aren't important, right? Yeah. But again, and so, but you'll have people that's the only thing they want to talk about, like only thing. And so in some ways, I think that there is a danger to this kind of fragmentation that has happened to the discourse as a whole, with so many different options of somebody, people just feeding you just little bits about that one single thing.
Yeah. What about you, Jenin?
It's a very good question, and it's something I struggle with a lot. I mean, people definitely seem to be exposed to more, like the legacy media was hugely problematic, and I think it became more and more so, to the point where, I mean, they were just acting as arms of government, basically. Totally. Like the major political, like Fox just as an arm of the Republican Party, the New York Times, CNN, just the Democrats. So there was no real fourth estate. And so I see why this all became popular, because and with, podcasts and social media, I'd say people felt they had a way of getting the truth. There are people whose voices could be heard, who wouldn't otherwise, like me and Mel. I mean, you're a real journalist, so it's a little different, but of course, I think you end up with a lot of these questions that came up on the Joe Rogan podcast with Dave Smith and Douglas Murray, like what makes someone trustworthy? And I think these are things people are still sorting through. And like, I mean, you gave the example of yourself in economics. I don't know anything about economics either. I don't talk about it. I actually don't know that much about Russia, Ukraine. I've tried to learn a lot, but I just don't have time. It's not, for whatever reason, it doesn't pique my interest the way other things do. So I just, I do make a point of only talking about things I know about. I know we had Scott Horton on too. I should absolutely read it. Yeah. No, I should read the book, but, I don't think everybody is as careful, about, only staying within their ambit of expertise. As, some of us, and I think you do have a responsibility, and I hope that in the end that's rewarded. I try to focus on the things I just happen to know a lot about.
Well, and it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Mel. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Funny enough, I've been in a Twitter spat with the real truther.
Oh God.
I'm sure if you've ever. Do you know who he is? Do you know
him?
Trish.
What's his name?
The real truther.
He had the wrong views on COVID and the wrong views on Israel-Palestine. So one of those.
Oh yes, this guy was I mean, I had already. It's funny. Jenin was like, "How have you not already blocked him from COVID?"
He was my first block because he was so annoying.
He's so obnoxious. But something else that I find interesting is that people like him, they will, number one, they have an immense amount of time on their hands, like a lot of time. And he's been in my mentions. I had to block him this morning finally because he challenged me on information that I talked about in the Naomi Wolf interview about, the role of the CIA in Nicaragua in arming Israel. I provided him with, plenty of evidence, links, wrote it out, everything. And of course the goalpost shift, the language shifts. These people are talented and whatnot, and so they want to try to discredit you any way you can, because again, that that goes back to the gatekeeping. And no, this is why you have to have legacy media. This is why you have to have, because of course they could control that. And that is the danger with the podcasting and anybody having a platform is that they can't control it. And you see the panic in their response all the time. It's crazy. You know, when I got somebody, I'm like giving you actual links to these are peer-reviewed studies and everything. This is not some crank out here writing something, you know. And still, no, that's a lie. I give you a link straight to the memoir of one of your quote unquote founding fathers. Well, we still don't have any proof that what he said was accurate. So you're calling him a liar in his memoir writing about this? You know, it's but again, it's just about gatekeeping and
well, I think, you know, I kind of blame legacy media also for what's happening in the podcast world, because being good at understanding things is hard work. You know, you can't just throw on a microphone and a camera and start babbling. And that might sound self-serving, but I don't think it's helping us. And so I do sound a bit like Douglas Murray on that, except I think anybody can have expertise if they put in the time, right? Like Douglas Murray, he's got like an undergraduate English degree. That's all
I know. I actually said that. I was like, you don't even have expertise by your own definition in the Middle East, Islam, Palestine, Israel.
And Max Blumenthal, who I'm sure he hates, like lived in Gaza for, like he was over there for years, right? And anyway, so, but I feel like we're in this world now where, especially with the bros who love speaking to each other and they love upping their numbers because they've just booked Destiny, who's got 500 or whatever he's got. Doesn't matter if he doesn't know what he's talking about, but his followers. That's what's going on right now. It's very dangerous for me. And you know, and legacy media and COVID, in a sense, have ruined that, because legacy media are the experts allegedly in information programming. And, you know, the science experts in COVID failed massively too. So but I feel like we're throwing the baby out with the bath. You know, don't ever forget the best book on the Middle East ever written was called, in my view, Pity the Nation by Robert Fisk. Love it. Yeah. I knew him. We used to book him on our show. It's about this thick and it will change your life. There are people out there kind of like that. There are fewer and fewer of these old school kind of investigative journalists out there. But look, I didn't really dig in until I'd spent days. I watched Al Jazeera again. I was watching, what's that show with Amy Goodman again? She did, I find her other views terrible, but on Israel Gaza, she was quite great. Like my poor husband would come in every day. I'd be sitting in front of the TV crying from watching all the stuff that was going on. And I didn't really foment within myself a big editorial position until I'd spent weeks rereading, rewatching, watching docs. All that stuff, that kind of care is not going on in the podcast world. Now, I think Joe Rogan and some of those guys are pretty good at curating people they have on. Joe is frequently late to the big issues, but when he gets there, he's there. And he's dragging a lot of people with him, which is terrific. But like Douglas Murray said to me, he had the absolute audacity to say, well, you've mostly got people on who think Israel has been, you know, too hard. And Joe Rogan actually said, well, I do see a lot of barbarism there, which I thought was great and true. But it's like, why is Douglas Murray the guy who's supposed to be officiating what Rogan's guests are? Rogan is doing well on guests. The people he has on, there's a few who are sketchy to me. I'm not going to name them, but mostly his guests have been really learned people. And also on just another Douglas Murray point, when he said, have you been there? Have you been there? You know, that big thing. Most journalists I know who've spent a minute and a half in that region think Douglas Murray is full of it. That's the truth.
He goes on like paid propaganda tours with the IDF. Like, I'm sorry, that's worse than nothing. That's not going and living there. Like, okay, my dad's from the region. He has the complete opposite perspective of Douglas Murray. Like, that alone is not, you know, it's just completely ridiculous. that.
I was mad about that because I watched it again this morning just before we did this. And I could see what he was doing. Like, there's a lot of sophistry in the way that Douglas Murray argues. Like, he's a good debater, right? Someone told him, and he was really good here. He did the monk debate here on how terrible legacy media was. I think with Matt Taibbi, it was fantastic. But he uses a lot of little techniques. And one of them in that show, if you are dissecting it, was he right off the gate, he was after Dave Smith and Joe Rogan for platforming Daryl Cooper from Martyr Made, right?
Which he'd never listened to the podcast.
How many times did he say? I wrote it down. He said that. Oh, I didn't hear it. I didn't see it. I don't know. Did he say that? And I was waiting for Dave or Joe to say, how are you criticizing something you've never heard before? Right.
And one of the things I haven't listened to all, actually, frankly, it's too dense for me. I don't really listen to it. But I did listen to Daryl Cooper's interview on Tucker. And he spent the first 10 minutes or so talking about how he knows what he knows, detailing all the books he's read. You don't need a formal degree. He said on the Tucker interview, he said something like I think he had read like from cover to cover, like 200 books on the subject and then thousands of other excerpts and records. Like just because you don't have a PhD in the history of World War II doesn't mean, you like, that's not the only way to know things.
And so Daryl Cooper is not Destiny, right? Like, so there, again, another continuum, right? Daryl Cooper works really hard to be right. And I have nothing against Destiny. I don't know anything about him. I'm just using him as a kind of an example. But this is a guy who really doesn't have any experience or knowledge about anything and what exactly. But the other thing I just want to say about, because I was holding this back until we talked about this, but somewhere along the line, Douglas Murray actually said that Hamas is worse than Nazis because the Nazis felt bad about killing Jews and had to get drunk after they did it. He said that. So
Dennis Prager was saying the same thing shortly after. I watched a debate with him on Zero Hedge, I think. Yeah, so I think that's a talking point they got. The Nazis, the only difference between the Nazis and Hamas is that Hamas is proud of their atrocities. They film it and they show it, and the Nazis hid their atrocities. Like,
so they're better people.
Is that? Yeah, and like also,
no, it's like if that's where, if you're defending Nazis to make your point, like you need better material, people.
Yeah,
really.
and like also the IDF films their atrocities all the time, and they're very proud of it. So I don't.
Well, not just that, but they said, they had to, ship them off to faraway concentration camps because they were so ashamed of what they were doing, and which is actually kind of Holocaust revisionism, because we also know that a lot of the Nazi deaths were the result of mass shootings that happened on the edges of town. So they weren't actually taking everyone out. They were marching people through the streets to the edge of town and then murdering them and burying them in mass graves. So. Yeah, I think something like the Holocaust online Holocaust encyclopedia attributes over 1 million deaths to that manner of execution. Yeah. So I found it very interesting that they would say that no, they were so ashamed of what they were doing, because that's actually not the official line, anyways. But sadly, these people are ghouls. There is nothing.
It's the thing about Douglas Murray is he just seems to grab at anything to make his point. Like he will not ever acknowledge the humanity of the Palestinian people. No. And as long as he refuses to do that, then I don't think he has any credibility at all, because that just bespeaks something, as he said, there's something really dark going on in podcasting these days, right? But really the darkness is in him. The darkness is in people who cannot see the humanity in these people who are being absolutely blown to bits. But just to end on that, I just want to say this one thing. I'm sorry, but it just a synapse fired. Yeah. There's a book called Ordinary Men. You probably know about it because you're both smart. And it was about I think it was a Polish police unit who were convinced to do terror. They were just ordinary guys, not even Nazis, just ordinary guys, convinced to do terrible things, take Jews out and shoot them on command. And they've been studying. There's a documentary on Netflix about it. There's a book about it. It's really worth seeing because they found that ordinary people will break down into three groups: the ones who do these terrible things with zeal, the ones who do it because they just do what they're told, and the ones who refuse to do it, right? And that's kind of across the board in many of these situations, what they found, right? But then I suppose if you add struggle, right? Like the difference is, I guess, that you could say, well, it's true that the Palestinians have a struggle, right? They have a struggle. So I don't know how one would categorize some of the terrible things that they did that day, but they probably fall into that group, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
there's so
one
much
other,
that we don't know about what actually happened that day. You know,
one thing I haven't got to say about Douglas Murray, and I did want to take the opportunity, is the only time he showed any, and I think this just shows his lack of viewing the ability to view Palestinians as people, like in humanity towards them. The only time he showed any issues with what Israel is doing in Gaza was in terms of talking about the trauma the IDF soldiers suffered by having to go in and do this. Like that, I mean, that just bespeaks a complete lack of ability to empathize with a group of people. And I think that just drives his entire worldview, and it shows. And no amount of, I think you said you used the word sophistry, which is a good one. No amount of sophistry can cover that up.
Yeah. Well, that's also an interesting point, because there will be trauma for those guys. And I looked at the numbers yesterday. I think 5,000 IDF are dead, 15,000 wounded. As someone who covered the Iraq War, these are wars about explosions. So the ones who live frequently envy the dead. You know, multiple limb amputations, faces gone, just awful. I don't know how Israel's going to pay for it. Well, I guess I do. We know
we do. We pay for it.
But we do. But that to me bespeaks also the kind of perfidy of Netanyahu, right? Like he's doing that to them in a sense. I mean, he would say they are at war, but those kids are never going to be normal, probably ever again, that they're sending in there.
Yep.
They do say that PTSD is worse in people who can find no moral underpinning for what they did in wartime. That's what the psychiatrists have learned. And so these guys are all brainwashed into hating them. Yes, October 7th happened. Yes, they've got to get Hamas. We all co-sign that. But the murder of these and the killing of these civilians will haunt them. They know what's happened, and that's what's happened. And at some point when they come back and there have been suicides of IDF soldiers back in Israel too. So, it's not a good thing. They get it. No. They'll get it on some level. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Here's pulled it up. So the IDF, and they've kept their numbers pretty close, but Middle East Monitor said that, I guess this was 1 month ago, they said 15,000 soldiers killed or wounded.
Yeah.
Which is, if you think about, it's a lot. That is a lot for a country of 9 million people. It is a tremendous amount. And these are of course, of your young men who, an entire generation, just really going to be scarred. And
you don't, like, I subscribe to Haaretz and read it quite frequently, and there's not a lot. And this was the same as the Iraq War in the States, though, too, right? Like, there's not a lot of coverage. And I know that in the Iraq War, when they first started bringing them back from Landstuhl, which is where they would patch them up after they were blown up in, Ramadi or wherever, they would bring them into Walter Reed Army Medical Center at night in these vans with blacked out windows, so you couldn't see them coming in. And I think there's a bit of a blackout in Israel too. They're not seeing what's returning from Gaza.
Yeah, that's true. I spoke to someone in Israel who actually works in, she does like the equivalent of First Amendment, anti-censorship work. She's a lawyer there, human rights lawyer. And so this surprised me. I thought, my impression was that the Israelis just didn't care about what was happening to the civilians in Gaza. And she said, no, they don't know. She said there are about 10 to 20% who are just very hardline and they don't care, but the rest would if they knew. But there's a total media blackout on the subject.
Yeah. I do recommend this. I just wanted to say, for you guys and anybody of your listeners, there's a really good piece in a journal. It's by the Middle East Institute. I have no idea what their politics are. I just found it, and it makes sense, called The Mainstreaming of Israeli Extremism. And it's dated December 18th, 2024. Fantastic. It goes all through how the people in Netanyahu's cabinet are former Meir Kahanists and all the stuff. I mean, and let's not forget, Yitzhak Rabin, who I interviewed and liked, was killed over the Oslo Peace Accords, which he was prepared to co-sign. Now, look, there were suicide bombings going on too. Everybody was crazy. But the people who were aggressively angry at Yitzhak Rabin for even trying to get the Oslo Accords signed were Likud party members and followers of Netanyahu, was on the way up, Meir Kahani's followers. That's who they were. So that's the other argument that Murray will make, and that's that the PLO and Hamas and the Palestinians never wanted a peace. And there was always conflict around it, but the Israelis didn't want it either. I mean, they killed their own prime minister to stop it, right?
Yeah.
So this is a good read. If you need just a little something to give someone who's wanting to know more, it's a very good read, I thought.
I'll link it in the description. Yeah. But yes, so I have to wrap it up.
Me
so
too. Well,
my daughter
thank you.
Waiting to be chauffeured over to her friend's house. So
great.
Well,
thanks
thank
for
you so much
on.
for joining
Thank
us,
you.
Trish. Yeah, tell people quickly where they can find you and your work.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a podcast that's called Trish Wood is Critical. It's about 5 years old now, and I have a Substack that's getting really popular because I've been writing a lot of stuff about Mark Carney, investigative things, and that's on Substack. You can find us there. We're audio only now, mostly on the podcast, but we're going to go to video because you have to. YouTube is the search engine, so if you're not on YouTube, you can't grow your audience, so we're going to do that. I hate video, but...
Oh, yeah, I think you look great.
Thanks. Thanks for bearing with us.
Hang on real quick, though, when we exit.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. I know you got to upload
everyone.
or something.
Yes.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.